So I want you to imagine a community that is deeply divided, like completely obsessed with status, clashing over personal freedoms, and constantly arguing over which leader is the absolute best.
Right. I mean, that just sounds exactly like modern society, doesn't it?
It really does. And welcome to the deep dive. But we aren't actually talking about today. We're talking about a community from 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's wild. People often think of ancient religious communities as these, serene, perfectly pious groups.
Right.
But this specific group was just a hotbed of ego and factionalism. They were basically bringing all the worst, most toxic habits of their surrounding culture right into their sacred spaces.
Which makes it incredibly relevant for you listening right now.
Yeah.
So the source material for our deep dive today is the first letter to the Corinthians. It's an ancient text written by the Apostle Paul, and we are looking specifically at the Catholic public domain version of the Sacred Bible.
And it is a phenomenal piece of history to look at.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this foundational document. We want to discover how Paul addresses a deeply fractured community, because what he offers them isn't just some list of rules.
No, not at all.
It's a profound blueprint for unity, wisdom, and love that honestly directly challenges our very instincts today.
Yeah, and setting the broader context is crucial before we look at the specific chaos of this letter. So, Corinth was this major cosmopolitan trade hub in the ancient world.
Like a booming metropolis.
Exactly. It was wealthy, wildly diverse, and deeply steeped in Greek philosophical traditions, as well as, a huge variety of religious cults.
Right.
So people there were completely obsessed with upward mobility and intellectual superiority. When Paul writes to this early Christian community, his overreaching goal is to wrestle their attention away from individual ego.
Right. He wants to point them back to a shared higher purpose.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the very first issue he addresses is
Yeah.
one of the most common human impulses, which is the cult of personality.
Oh, yeah, the tribalism.
Right, so he's received word that the community has completely splintered into these tribal factions. People are running around claiming things like, I am of Paul, or I am of Apollo, or I am of Cephas.
It's so relatable. We see the exact same behavior today, right?
Oh, absolutely, like toxic political tribalism or celebrity worship. It's fascinating how quickly we humans try to outsource our thinking to a charismatic leader. People become so obsessed with wearing the jersey of their favorite team captain that they lose sight of the actual game.
And Paul's response to this is brilliant. He completely demystifies the role of the leader.
How so?
Well, he uses a very grounded agricultural metaphor to just dismantle their intellectual elitism. He tells them, I planted, Apollo watered, but God provided the growth.
So he's stripping away that celebrity status they've projected onto him.
Exactly. The human leaders are just assistants. The farmhand doesn't make the seed grow. Paul explicitly says, neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything.
He's reminding them that they are just farmhands, entirely dependent on the weather.
Right. He even asks this incredibly pointed rhetorical question. He says, was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul?
Wow, that is pointed.
Yeah, he is highlighting the sheer absurdity of building a brand identity around the messenger instead of the message.
You can really feel his frustration bleeding through the text. He uses some pretty striking jargon to describe their immaturity.
He does. The carnal infants comment.
Yes, he calls them carnal infants. In modern terms, he's basically saying they are entirely driven by base fleshly instincts, like toddlers throwing a tantrum over a toy.
That's a great way to put it.
He says he had to give them milk to drink, not solid food, because their envy and their endless debating just prove they simply aren't ready to digest complex spiritual truths.
What's fascinating here is how Paul goes on to completely flip the ancient world's definition of wisdom upside down to cure this ego problem.
Right, because they all thought they were so smart.
Exactly. He points out that the Jews are asking for miraculous signs, and the Greeks are seeking lofty, sophisticated philosophical wisdom. But Paul says his only message is Christ crucified.
Which, as he openly admits in the text, is a massive public relations problem.
Yeah.
I mean, to the Jewish audience, he says it's a scandal, and to the Gentiles, it's just utter foolishness.
It really was. To understand why it was such a tough sell, you have to look at the first century Roman Empire. A crucified savior wasn't just weird, it was an absolute oxymoron.
Because it was a punishment for criminals, right?
Worse than that, crucifixion was the ultimate symbol of state domination, humiliation, and absolute weakness. It was designed to erase a person's dignity entirely.
Wow.
So for the Greeks, who valued stoicism and intellectual dominance, the idea of worshiping a victim of state execution was laughable. But Paul argues that the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom.
Right, because God specifically chooses the weak and the foolish.
Yes, the weak, the foolish, and the ignoble. The people the Roman world considers literal nobodies. He chooses them to completely confound the strong.
And the mechanism behind that choice is crucial. The text says God does this so that nothing of the flesh should glory in his sight.
Because you can't brag about following a crucified man.
Exactly. If salvation and wisdom come through an instrument of total humiliation like the cross, you can't exactly walk around the marketplace bragging about how intellectually superior your faction is.
The cross obliterates human pride. And Paul knows that until this community lets go of their intellectual pride, they will never be able to fix the practical behavioral chaos that is literally tearing them apart.
And that behavioral chaos is where things get really wild. Because, well, when a group believes they possess some elite enlightened wisdom, they often start to believe the normal rules just don't apply to them anymore.
Oh, 100%.
That spiritual arrogance leads directly into their everyday lives. We see this with the shocking ethical scandals Paul addresses next.
The lawsuit?
Yes. You have members of the community taking each other to pagan Roman courts to sue over petty disputes. And even worse, there's a case of sexual immorality where a man is sleeping with his father's wife.
Yeah, Paul actually notes that this is a scandal even the pagan Gentiles wouldn't tolerate.
Which is saying something for ancient Corinth.
Exactly. Yet the community's reaction isn't horror. The text says they are inflated with pride. They are so convinced of their newfound spiritual liberty that they view this taboo behavior as like a badge of enlightenment.
That is just wild.
So Paul uses the imagery of Passover bread to explain the danger here. He tells them that a little leaven corrupts the entire mass. Just a tiny bit of yeast spreads through a whole batch of dough, fundamentally changing its chemical makeup.
So he commands them to purge this old leaven out.
Right.
He actually says, hand over such a one as this to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that the spirit may be saved.
It sounds extreme.
It does. I have to admit some confusion here, or at least, I want to push back a little. For a community that is supposed to be built on grace and forgiveness, throwing someone out into the streets of the Roman Empire sounds incredibly harsh.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the survival mechanics of a micro-community in the ancient world.
Okay.
The harshness of the expulsion is directly tied to the historical stakes. In Roman society, your safety, your commerce, and your social standing were entirely tied to the group you belonged to.
So being cast out was dangerous.
Extremely. But Paul isn't acting out of malice here. He's acting as a spiritual surgeon. If this tiny, fragile Christian community loses its distinct moral identity, it will simply dissolve back into the toxic soup of Corinthian culture.
Right.
The expulsion is a severe wake-up call. It's an intervention designed to break the offender's pride so they might eventually repent and come back.
Okay, so it's drawing a hard line to protect the ecosystem of the group. Which brings us to Paul's profound underlying rule regarding personal freedom. He writes, all is lawful to me, but not all is expedient.
Right. Not all is edifying.
Exactly. Essentially, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. It doesn't mean it actually builds anybody up.
And this is where Paul introduces a completely radical ethic for community life. And the ultimate test case for this in Corinth revolves around the marketplace.
The great debate over eating meat sacrificed to idols.
Yes.
Right, because most of the quality meat sold in the Corinthian marketplace had been ritually slaughtered in pagan temples. So you have this one faction in the church who possess this enlightened knowledge.
The ones who know the idols are fake.
Exactly. They argue, hey, we know these stone idols are fake. There's only one real God. Therefore, eating this meat is morally neutral. It's just barbecue. I have the personal liberty to eat it.
And their logic is entirely sound. Paul actually agrees with their theology. The meat is neutral. But he fundamentally disagrees with how they are wielding that knowledge.
Why is that?
He points out that not everyone in the community has that same level of understanding. You might have a new member who just barely escaped a lifetime of abusive pagan cult worship. For them, eating that meat is deeply triggering.
Paul calls this having an infirm conscience. And he warns the enlightened members not to let their personal liberty become a stumbling block.
A stumbling block is serious.
It is. It isn't just annoying someone. It's actively causing another person's spiritual or emotional collapse. I mean, think about your own life for a second. How often do we insist on our right to say something or consume something, completely disregarding the anxiety or damage it might cause the person sitting in the exact same room as us?
It's a profound challenge to modern individualism, really. Paul says, knowledge puffs up, but charity builds up. He introduces this radical empathy. He states that if eating meat harms a brother whose conscience is weak, he will never eat meat again. He is willing to permanently sacrifice a perfectly valid personal freedom simply to protect the emotional and spiritual safety of his neighbor.
And he puts his money where his mouth is, literally. He applies this principle to his own livelihood.
The stipend issue.
Yes. As an apostle, he points out that he has every right to demand a financial stipend from the Corinthians for his work. He uses real-world examples, right? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat from its produce? Who pastures a flock and does not drink from the milk?
Even the law of Moses dictates that you shouldn't muzzle an ox while it's treading the grain. The worker is owed their wages.
Yet, Paul willingly absorbs the hardship. He works with his own hands, gets beaten, goes hungry, and refuses to take a single coin from them. Also, he doesn't create any hindrance to the gospel.
It's an incredible level of discipline.
He compares it to an athlete training for the games, running the race and chastising his body, not for a leafy crown that will rot away in a week, but to achieve an incorruptible crown.
And this willingness to surrender personal rights for the health of the community really exposes the deep flaws in how the Corinthians are actually conducting their physical gatherings.
Oh, the gatherings.
Because if you refuse to limit your freedom for the sake of others, your communal gatherings are going to turn into a total disaster.
And they absolutely do. The text describes their Lord's Supper, which is supposed to be this ultimate unifying meal, as just a chaotic mirror of Roman social stratification.
It's pretty heartbreaking.
To understand the mechanism here, you have to picture a wealthy Roman villa. The wealthy host and their rich friends are in the main dining room. They're eating the good food and getting literally inebriated.
While the poor are left outside.
Exactly. The working class or enslaved members of the church, who can't get off work until sundown, arrive late. They're shoved out into the courtyard and go completely hungry.
It is a devastating betrayal of the one body they claim to represent. They are basically treating the sacred meal like a private VIP club.
Yes.
And that selfish showmanship spills right over into how they worship. When they gather, everyone is aggressively competing to show off their diverse spiritual gifts.
Like it's a talent show.
Precisely. You have one person shouting words of wisdom, another trying to perform healings, someone else prophesying, and others speaking in tongues all at the same exact time.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To combat this chaotic showboating, Paul introduces one of the most famous and enduring metaphors in Western literature.
The body metaphor.
Yes, the analogy of the human body. He tells them that just as a physical body is a single entity made up of many different parts, so is this community. The foot cannot look at the hand and say, because I'm not a hand, I'm not part of the body.
This raises an important question regarding how a society values human life. In Roman culture, the strong, the beautiful, and the wealthy were exalted, right? While the weak and the poor were entirely disposable.
Totally disposable.
But Paul argues for the exact opposite architecture. He says that God intentionally surrounds the weaker or less presentable parts of the body with more abundant dignity.
Like clothing the parts we consider less noble.
Yes. Paul says God designs the community this way specifically to prevent schisms. If one part suffers, the whole body suffers. If one part is honored, all rejoice.
And he applies this directly to their worship wars, specifically comparing two spiritual gifts. Speaking in tongues, which is this ecstatic, mysterious private language, versus prophecy,
Right.
which in this context means clear, intelligible instruction or revelation. Paul says he vastly prefers prophecy.
Because it's actually useful to the group.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
prophecy edifies and builds up the whole church, whereas speaking in tongues only edifies the individual doing it.
It's the stark difference between private ecstasy and public service. If you are speaking in a language no one else understands, you aren't contributing to the ecosystem, you're just drawing attention to yourself.
He uses this brilliant trumpet analogy. If a trumpet makes an uncertain, chaotic sound, who is going to prepare for battle?
Nobody.
Right. If you're just making noise into the air to feel spiritually superior, you aren't helping anyone get ready for the actual challenges of life. Everything must be done for edification, for building up the house.
But, telling people to use their gifts for the group isn't really enough, because human ego will always find a way to corrupt even the best intentions.
So true.
Paul knows this, which is why he tells them they need to be zealous for the better gifts, but then he pivots. He reveals an entirely different operating system for human interaction. He calls it a yet more excellent way.
And that brings us to chapter 13. Now, if you've ever been to a Western wedding, you have almost certainly heard chapter 13 read aloud.
Oh, definitely.
It sounds beautiful and poetic, but when you read it in the context of this letter, you realize it is not a romantic poem at all.
Not at all.
It is a gritty, hard-hitting survival manual for a community that is actively tearing itself apart.
It completely reframes the text. In the first century, the concept of agape, translated here as charity, wasn't a warm emotional feeling. It was a deliberate act of the will.
Right.
When Paul says, if I were to speak in the language of men or of angels, yet not have charity, I would be like a clanging bell or a crashing cymbal. He is directly calling out those people showing off with tongues.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's telling them their prized spiritual gifts are just unbearable, deafening noise without self-giving love.
And he pushes it to the absolute extreme. He says, if I obtain all knowledge and have faith to move mountains, and if I give away all my goods and even hand my physical body over to be burned, wait, let me rephrase that without quoting directly. Even if you give up your body to the flames, yet not have charity, it offers you nothing.
It's all worthless.
Exactly. You could be the ultimate celebrated martyr, but if your underlying motivation is just a desperate grab for status and not this deep self-sacrificial charity, your actions are spiritually bankrupt.
And notice the specific verbs Paul uses to describe this charity. It is patient. It is kind. It does not envy. It is not inflated. It does not seek for itself. It is not provoked to anger.
Those sound very specific to Corinth.
They are. He didn't pick those words at random. These are the exact point-by-point antidotes to the Corinthian chaos we just discussed.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. The Corinthians are impatient at the Lord's Supper. They are envious of each other's gifts. They are inflated with pride over scandal, and they are provoked to anger, suing each other in court. Charity is the precise medicine formulated to cure the disease of their division.
So what does this all mean? How do you actually sustain that? Because let's be honest, living with that kind of radical self-sacrificial charity is exhausting.
It's incredibly hard.
It goes against every instance of self-preservation we possess. To lay down your rights and endure the messiness of other people requires a massive horizon of hope. And that necessity brings us to the final major theological argument of the letter, the resurrection.
You simply cannot ask a community to continually surrender their egos and endure suffering without giving them an eternal perspective that makes those sacrifices meaningful.
And Paul lays out the ultimate stakes. He reminds them of the historical core of his message. Christ died, was buried, and rose again on the third day.
The foundation of everything.
Right. He notes that Christ was seen by Cephas, the 11, and then over 500 brothers at once, many of whom Paul explicitly says are still alive. He's basically daring the skeptics to go interview the eyewitnesses.
He's saying go ask them.
Yeah, and he is incredibly blunt. He says, if the dead do not rise, then our preaching is useless, your faith is vain, and we are still dead in our sins.
He takes it a step further, saying that if this physical life is all there is, Christians are the most miserable of all men for enduring beatings and limiting their own freedoms.
I mean, logically that tracks.
Right. If there is no resurrection, his logical advice is, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we shall die. Go ahead, be selfish, indulge the ego, sue your neighbor. But, he insists, Christ has risen as the first fruits of those who sleep.
But why does a physical resurrection fix their ethical chaos? It addresses the root of their bad behavior. The Greeks believed in a dualism where the physical body was a temporary, disposable prison, and only the spirit mattered.
Which is why they behave so badly.
That's exactly why the Corinthians thought it was fine to sleep with their stepmothers or get drunk at sacred meals. They thought what they did with their bodies just didn't count.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so Paul is arguing that if the physical body is going to be resurrected and is eternal, then what you do with it now carries eternal weight.
To explain the mechanism of how a body can rise, Paul uses a really beautiful piece of natural observation, the seed analogy.
Okay, break that down for us.
He points out that what you sow in the ground cannot be brought back to life unless it first dies. You don't plant a fully grown stalk of wheat, right? You plant a bare, fragile grain.
Right.
The seed has to break open in the dark and undergo a radical transformation.
The text says it is sown in corruption, but it rises in incorruption. It is sown in weakness, but it rises in power.
And the transformation is staggering. What is sown as an animal body, subject to decay, disease, and death, rises as a spiritual body in glory.
Wow.
The first man, Adam, was of the earth, earthly. The second man, Christ, is of heaven, heavenly. Paul assures them that just as we have carried the image of the earthly, we will carry the image of the heavenly.
It's beautiful.
It is the ultimate cosmic victory where, as Paul quotes from the ancient prophets, death is swallowed up in victory. Death entirely loses its sting.
Which brings our deep dive full circle. We've traced the incredible journey of this letter. We started by looking at a fractured, chaotic community obsessed with worldly wisdom, dragging each other to court and fiercely defending their personal liberties at the expense of their neighbors.
A total mess.
And through Paul's systematic arguments, we've seen them call toward a totally different way of existing, becoming a unified body where the vulnerable are afforded the most protection, where every action is bound together by the gritty, self-sacrificial glue of charity,
Right.
and where the entire project is anchored by the triumphant reality of the resurrection.
You see this very grounded application right at the end of the text, too. Paul closes with practical instructions, setting aside collections on the first day of the week to help the impoverished saints in Jerusalem, and a final, sweeping command to let everything be immersed in charity.
It's an ancient text, but it addresses the messy reality of human relationships with startling modern relevance.
It truly does. And, it makes you wonder about our current trajectory.
How so?
Well, if Paul views a healthy community as a physical body where the weakest, least presentable parts are given the most honor and care, how does that reframe our modern obsession with self-optimization and relentless hustle culture?
Oh, that's a great point.
Right. In our drive to be the smartest, the wealthiest, and the most independent, are we inadvertently creating a society of disembodied hands and feet, entirely severed from the people we were meant to support?
Imagine a community that deeply divided, learning to finally share the same mind, limit their own freedoms, and actually bear each other's burdens. It's an incredibly high bar, but what a fascinating blueprint to leave behind. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.